Well, this is fun. Wow. Victorville. Good to be here. Oh, man. You know how nice it is to see a friendly group smiling and laughing. My colleagues and I, we go to some places there where they don't smile and laugh very often. You know, secular university campuses, they hear what's going on among Christians, and it's a 50-50 shot that you're going to be chased off the campus, you know. Doesn't matter how kind or generous or smart you are, you're going to get chased off. It's rough sledding out there, so it's nice to come to a group where people are smiling and maybe even receptive to what we have to say. Way to go. So I went to a college campus in Olympia, Washington, a couple of years ago, and that was a memorable experience. From what I understand, Washington State is one of the most unchurched states in the country. And then if you go to Washington State and you ask the people there, what's the most unchurched city in Washington? They immediately answer, well, that would be Olympia, the state capital. And so if you go to a secular university campus in Olympia, Washington, by just about any measure, you have hit spiritual rock bottom in America, right? So imagine my surprise when I get a call in my Biola University office from a Christian club at a university like this. I'm thinking, my goodness, how could that university in Olympia even have a Christian club? Turns out it wasn't much of a club, really. It was a couple of guys. Now, I really do think they were Christians, but they were business majors, and they discovered that if they start a club, they get access to Associated Students' money. So they're walking around with fistfuls of cash, wondering what to do with it. So they say, hey, we've been reading these guys and listening to their CDs and stuff. We should invite some of these Christian thinkers up here. If nobody turns out, we just have lunch with them. So that was their little program. So literally, they sent me money to fly up to Seattle, Washington. They picked me up at the airport, and they're gunning it down I-5 towards Olympia. For some sort of lunchtime lecture. I'd done some nice preparation on a wonderful lecture on the interaction of science and faith for a college campus, It was going to be fun even if it was just these two guys. So there was a lot going on that I didn't know. They pull into the parking lot, and we're a little bit behind schedule, so we're rushing into a building. We go into a building, and I see something on the wall over here, and it's my face about yay big, right? Now, that's disturbing enough, but underneath my face were flames. And there was a whole theme to this event. It was come barbecue the Christian. Yeah, and at the very moment I walked into the building, there were guys walking past me with wheelbarrows full of barbecued chicken wings. See, there was a whole barbecue theme to the event, And I walk around the corner into this lecture hall. It's big and it's jammed. There's standing room only. There are undergraduates, there's graduate students, there's guys in white lab coats, there's janitors, there's people's moms in there. I guess it just doesn't get any better than that on a college campus. You get to watch a Christian be dismembered, and then you get to celebrate by eating wings, So, I'm trying to catch up with what's going on. Honestly, it sounded like fun to me. I'm a little warped in that way, but I'm thinking, all right, I think I can adjust to this. So the guys, they hadn't really thought this through, these two organizers. So they give the ground rules to the audience. All right, here's the thing, people. You ask questions for an hour, and then you get to eat wings. That was it. They introduced me, and I say a couple of opening remarks, and then I just stood there and said, all right, let's hear your questions. So I've been doing this for a while, and things have changed over time. The questions have changed. They've gotten stupider. Now, you would think that the atheist and agnostic community would really have honed their game, Like they would have been asking me new, very difficult questions based on, advanced quantum physics or something. But no, almost every question they asked derived from the Da Vinci Code. It was pathetic. It was as if everybody in that room had gained all of their theological knowledge by reading the Da Vinci Code. And, So In fact, I had to help them ask better questions. Like, sir, that would be a little bit harder for me if you were to formulate it this way, and I hand it back to him, And then he asks me that question, and I go, oh, that's a hard one, But even more interesting is that at a certain point, the questions just dried up. Now, this is a college campus, and they're highly motivated to ask questions, right? Because they get to eat wings, and they're all starving, and the smell is wafting through the air. And they kind of stop. Now, this is a college campus, for goodness sakes. These are young people studying art history and sociology and organic chemistry and thinking big thoughts. And we're in this room talking about one of the great religious traditions of humankind, and where you get to talk about God and angels and souls and afterlife and all this kind of thing. And the questions dry up. Something's wrong on college campuses if they can't ask a question. So I could just I wasn't going to let him eat the wings. I was standing there, So they're feeling a little pressure. I saw a guy out in the middle of the room. He's nudging his neighbor. He's like, ask the question. And the guy's like, okay. So he sheepishly raises his hand. Of course, I'm scanning for motion. You. And it's like, boo. And he stands up and he goes, so like, so do you believe in baptism? Do you believe in baptism? Strange question. So I said, sir, not only do I believe in it, but I've seen it done. There was this pause for a second. This beat, and then all of a sudden they just broke out into laughter. Everybody was cracking up, and you could actually visibly see the shields come down in the room. And for the last 10 or 15 minutes, they got a chance to ask like richer questions, like spiritually, germane questions, right? They're like, so tell me, are you really an academic and a Christian? How does that work? Did you grow up in this? Do your kids believe this stuff? Were you dropped on your head as a child? But once the shields went down, they actually were curious about a few things because the game of gotcha was over, and so now we're just actually having a little bit of a conversation. I wish that would have lasted longer because I think we could have really made some progress, but the time ran out and they released them for the wings. Oh, you should have seen these people, They talked a good game about ethics and morality, but they're pushing people down. People in walkers are being, thrown into the wall as people are making their way to get their wings. Oh, and clearly there was an overabundance of architecture majors and structural engineering majors in the group. You know how I could tell that? They gave them little plates, but they were able to build towers of wings. With flying buttresses, and arched doorways, the whole. It was astonishing. It has a funny ending, this whole craziness. So I remember I finished talking, and I'm talking to somebody down here. I was on this little platform. I was talking to somebody here. I've learned to use my peripheral vision on these secular campuses, by the way. You never know what's coming at you, And I saw some commotion at the wing table. There was some woman with a giant plate of wings, and she's coming around the bend. She's got something important. Well, I'm talking to somebody over here who got up to ask me a question personally, and so we're chatting, and she's got a plate of wings. And she's coming at me. She's eating one. And she's got schmutz on her face here. And she just kind of leans over me and goes, hey, you. I'm like, yes, ma'am. She's like, I have a thing. I'm like, yes, ma'am, what's your thing? She goes, well, my thing is that there aren't enough women in the Bible. I'm thinking, this is so weird. And I was thinking, she's probably a plant from the drama department, sent in to mess with me. So I was messing with her. I'm like, oh, yeah, I totally know what you mean. She's like, yeah? I go, yeah. Yeah, like, say, the three wise men. should have been the three wise women. She's like, yeah. I go, that makes so much more sense. I mean, think about it. If it were three wise men, they would have arrived on time. No, I'm sorry. If it were three wise women, they would have arrived on time because women ask for directions, you know. And they would have helped deliver the baby. They would have cleaned the stable. Oh, and the women would have brought practical gifts, for goodness sakes. They would have brought a baby blanket and a casserole, you know. And the woman goes, yeah, you get it. You get it. See, I just, for the life of me, don't know what we're afraid of. My colleagues and I, we travel all over the country, and we go to these wonderful, vibrant evangelical churches, and we detect palpable fear in the congregations. People are afraid to do two things. They're afraid to share their faith openly with other people, and they're afraid even to live big for Jesus because they really are terrified that somebody's going to turn around and ask them a really hard question. You know, and they forgot to read that Lee Strobel book. Oh, if only I knew I should have read it. Josh McDowell, you know, why didn't I read that? And so they're walking around in this fear. Here's the good news. Now, you do have to do a little bit of work to ramp it up so that you can have knowledge and therefore confidence. In fact, that's what we're all about this weekend, is to build your knowledge base so that you can have the confidence to share your faith and to live big for Jesus and actually be kind of excited that somebody might ask you a question. Because you're fresh off a wonderful seminar in apologetics and you've got an armful of resources and you're studying this stuff up. It really makes a huge difference. In fact, we have a certificate program in apologetics at Biola. And when I'm down at the campus, you know, I promote the certificate program because it's open to everybody. But here's what I say in my promotion. I say, if you do our certificate program, you will rise to the top 5% of religiously literate people in the world. And people go, wow, that must be some certificate program you have there. Well, it is a wonderful certificate program, but the comment is not about the certificate program. The comment is about the incredibly low level of understanding out there in the general public. What are we afraid of? Oh my goodness. You just attend a seminar like this, you read a couple of books, you watch a couple of DVDs, you gain some new arguments, a little confidence, and all of a sudden you can't wait to talk to some non-Christians. Because it turns, in fact, I'll give you the conclusion of the whole seminar, okay? Hopefully you'll stay for the rest of it, but here it is. Turns out Christianity's true. Yeah. And I mean the real kind of true, you know, the true stuff. Yeah. It turns out Christianity is true. It turns out there really is a God who loves us, who created us so that he could have this love relationship with us. It really turns out that human beings shook our fists at God and went our own way, and that he sent his son to repair the breach. And that if we just put our focus on him, trust him, that God will bring us back to him for all eternity. That's a true story of all that ever was, is, or will be. And we are in possession of it. And here's the fun part in terms of this thing we call apologetics. Apologetics is simply giving reasons for faith, defending the faith. It turns out that every fact in the universe backs up that basic story. We have nothing to fear. The reason my colleagues and I win debates so regularly on college campuses is because we happen to be holding the true position, a position which is backed up by all the evidence. We stand on this tremendous foundation of knowledge in Christianity. And Christianity is a knowledge tradition. We know things. You know, people accuse us all the time of this, and I know they accuse you of this, that what we're really about as Christians, or as any kind of religious believers, is this: blind leaping. I think you will discover this weekend that you can walk into Christianity with your eyes wide open and examine the evidence every step of the way. Because it turns out it's true, and every fact of the universe, seen and unseen, backs it up. we can know this to be true. I can't wait to talk to you tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, I'll be talking about how Christianity is set apart from the other great world religious traditions. It's a teaching that comes from a book I have called 5 Sacred Crossings. Check that out. It's a novel. If you're not into reading academic textbooks, I think you'll really like this. It's kind of a challenge to the Da Vinci Code, you know? Dan Brown wrote a fast-paced mystery story with a bunch of nonsense about Christianity planted in the middle of it, and I wrote a fast-paced mystery story with a bunch of true stuff about Christianity planted in the middle of it. So come tomorrow morning, and I think you will really enjoy what we got going. Right now, we're just doing rapid-fire mini lectures, and I'm done. You're going to now hear from Dr. David Horner from the Talbot Department of Philosophy of Religion and Ethics at Biola University. Dr. Horner.
Well, good evening. Oh, what a great place. What a great people. As the prison warden said to the new inmates who had just arrived, the world is a better place because you are here. And the world is a better place because you are here. And I commend you for taking time off for your weekend to come out and think about stuff. As Craig was talking, I was reminded of I went to the American Atheist National Convention some years ago over Easter weekend in Denver. And this is true. I was talking to an atheist named Lee, and we talked for quite a long time. We went to McDonald's and had a hamburger, and I looked over at the table at him and I said, Lee, tell me something. How do you know God doesn't exist? He said, because he told me so. God told you he doesn't exist? That's right. The Lord appeared to me in a holy vision and told me he doesn't exist. Lee is one of those guys, you know. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. Just comes to a little bit different conclusion than most people. Now, he was serious. And so I said, Lee, that just doesn't make any sense. That's like if a dog walked up to you and said, dogs can't talk. If he's right, he's wrong. Lee never quite got it. Now, we're telling some funny stories. We don't want you to think that every person who doesn't believe in God has those sorts of extremely weak reasons. What I'd like to do this evening is to kind of challenge you with the importance of taking ideas seriously. And I'd like to tell you a tale of two cities. In southern Poland, there's a small little farming village called Oświęcim. It's a tiny little place. It would never show up on the radar screen of important places in the world, except for the fact that during World War II, the Nazi army built a concentration camp just outside Oświęcim, which they called Auschwitz. At Auschwitz, perhaps as many as 4 million people were put to death. I used to work in Poland back behind the Iron Curtain days, and had a chance to visit Auschwitz a few times. Has anyone here been there before? Okay, a few of you. And you will attest to how difficult that experience is. There are rooms that are set up to illustrate things that happened to the victims of Auschwitz. So there's a room, for example, full of eyeglass frames, just piled high, of the people who were murdered at Auschwitz. There's a room full of combs. There's a room full of human hair shaved from the victims of Auschwitz. Most of the hair was sent actually back to Germany to make clothing and blankets for the war effort. There's a room full of teeth where precious metals had been torn out of the teeth, extracted to fund the war effort. There's the room full of showers where the prisoners were allowed to go to take a shower, but instead of water, out of the shower heads came Cyclone B gas, and they were asphyxiated. And then, of course, there are the ovens, the height of German engineering at that time, to be able to incinerate the bodies on a mass scale to obliterate all evidence of their existence. Excuse me. To me, the most disturbing and most impacting room at Auschwitz was not the room full of eyeglasses or combs or even the showers or the ovens. It was the room full of suitcases. It was a big room with glass on one wall, and the suitcases were piled up in a kind of pyramid shape. Little ones, a little bit bigger ones. None of them were as big as the suitcases we use today. They had names on them, the names of the people that brought those in. Moms and dads, little boys and little girls, sons and daughters, aunts and uncles, cousins, neighbors, friends, lovers, bringing all that they had and handing it to a guard who painted their name on it and said, when your work here is done, you'll be able to take this away. Every one of those individuals with a name created by God, loved by God. And the second time I was there, I was with the woman I was dating. She's now my wife, Debbie. And she said, Dave, look at this. And in the middle, about a third of the way up, was a suitcase that had the name Eva Horner on it. And my last name is Horner. Now, I don't know if Eva is related to me. I've done a little bit of work on it. I don't think she is or was. But just the thought that she might be made Auschwitz very personal to me. And at that point, I only knew two things about Eva, really. Number one, her name. And number two, that Eva Horner was the victim of an idea. See, people think of Auschwitz and Birkenau and Dachau and the Nazi Holocaust murdering machine as often as a kind of mystery, an anomaly. How could the most highly cultured, highly educated nation in the history of the planet up to that time, which Germany was, how could they do such things? It's just absurd. There's no answer to this. But I think it's much more accurate to think of Auschwitz not as a mystery, but as a monument to an idea. It's an idea that didn't begin at Auschwitz. It was an idea that captured the minds of German intellectuals, judges, scholars, professors, doctors, decades before Auschwitz. Beginning in the 1920s, they began to kill ethnic Germans. Tens of thousands of Germans were taken out of mental hospitals and nursing homes and put to death for the sake of this idea. In German, it's lebensunwertes Leben, a life not worthy to be lived. It was judged that these people's lives were not worthy to be lived. Eventually, they put people to death for such chronic problems as bedwetting and having poorly formed ears. Ideas have consequences. What you believe will determine how you behave and ultimately who you become. This is true for individuals, it's true for families, it's true for institutions, it's true for nations. Eva Horner was the victim of an idea. If we care about ideas, if we care about people, if we care about our children, we care about our church, we care about the world, we care about our neighbors, if we care about ourselves, we'd better care about ideas. The world is a better place because you're here. Not so that you can become a scholar, although some of you maybe should, but so that you can be as good a thinker as you can possibly be by the power of the Holy Spirit, because ideas have consequences. We'd better take them seriously. Now, I told that story for several years before my wife found a slide in our garage that I had taken that day, apparently in Auschwitz. And I now have a picture of the suitcase. Eva Horner's name on it, her prison number, and her date of birth. Eva Horner was the victim of an idea. But I told you I was going to tell you about two villages. There's a much happier story occurring at the same time in a small farming village in France called Le Chambon in the southern mountains of France. A village of less than 5,000 people that banded together during World War II and rescued more than 5,000 Jews from the Holocaust, led by a courageous pastor by the name of André Trocmé. You can see him in the left corner with his wife in that picture. This was a village full of Christians, Huguenot Protestant Christians in France. They had been persecuted themselves. And when the edict came down to deliver all the Jews over to be transported to the camps, André Trocmé stood up in the church the next day and he said, "This town will be a city of refuge." And they did. They banded together, they prayed together, they worked together, and they rescued more than 5,000 Jews from the Holocaust, mostly children. Now, my major field is in ethics and philosophy, and I can tell you that this village of Le Chambon is almost as famous as Auschwitz in that field, because philosophers consider this the greatest example of altruism or sacrificial love of the 20th century. When people all over Europe were either killing Jews or standing by and turning a blind eye to it, the people of Le Chambon were at great risk of their lives. They were banding together to deliver these people. And ideas have consequences here, because when these philosophers went back over to Le Chambon, when some of the rescues were still alive, and they interviewed them, and there's a film you can see, by the way, called Weapons of the Spirit. It's produced by Pierre Sauvage, who as a baby was rescued by the people of Le Chambon. And he's now a filmmaker in Hollywood. He took a film crew over there, and they interviewed these people. And what they said were things like, well, I don't know what the big deal is. I mean, we're supposed to love our neighbors ourselves, and these were our neighbors. One lady said, well, I didn't want to be like the priest and the Levite who walked on the other side of the road when the man had fallen among thieves, and these people had certainly fallen among thieves. What they said just drips of a Christian worldview. These were not scholars, but these were people who saw the world through the lens of the Bible. And they did what came naturally when so many people in Europe did not. One Jewish mother with her baby came to a farmhouse, and she knocked on the door, just absolutely scared to death for her life and the life of her child. And the farm wife opened the door and invited her in, and she said, could I have some food? And the farm wife said, are you Jewish? And the woman was petrified, because to say yes to that question in Europe at that time was to seal your death warrant. But she was honest, she said yes. And then, to her horror, the woman ran out of the kitchen and ran to another part of the house, but then she could hear her yelling up the stairs, husband, children, come quickly. In our kitchen at this very moment is a member of God's chosen people. These were Christians who thought Christianly. Ideas have consequences. What you believe will determine how you behave and ultimately who you become. So this weekend, I invite you to, with me, whenever I think of this, whenever I think about how important it is that what we're talking about, I think of this suitcase. Because it's not just ideas, it's not just books, it's people. It's real people. Now I want to leave you with one other little flavor from Auschwitz. I'll tell you about a guy named Maximilian Kolbe. Maximilian Kolbe was a priest in Poland when the Nazis came in. And he had an underground printing press, and he was printing off newspapers against the Nazis when he got caught. He was thrown into Auschwitz. And they had a policy at Auschwitz where if a prisoner escaped, they would randomly select 10 other prisoners. They would throw them into starvation cells, like what you see on the right there, and they would starve them to death unless the prisoner was found and returned, and then they would allow them to go back into the rest of the camp where they would, probably die anyway. Well, one day it happened, and somebody escaped, so they put everyone out on this little parade ground, which is right, if you can see the little window in that picture, that's like a window well, and it opens up into a parade ground out there, a place where prisoners would mill around, and everybody went out there, and they randomly picked 10 prisoners. And one of them cried out for mercy. He said, I'm a young Polish farmer, I have young children, please. And of course, the soldiers didn't care, but Maximilian Kolbe raised his hand. And he said, I'll take his place. I'm just an old priest. I'll take his place. Okay, if you want. So they threw Maximilian Kolbe into this cell. And he was a stubborn guy. And he wouldn't die. He just kept singing and praying, and he just wouldn't die. And the prisoners who milled around outside that window could hear Kolbe singing and praying. And it had a powerful effect on them. One prisoner was a young Polish man by the name of Franciszek Blachnicki. And Blachnicki heard this old priest singing and praying, and Blachnicki gave his life to Jesus. By a clerical mistake, Blachnicki was sent to another prison camp in Germany, where he learned German and survived the war. When the war was over, Blachnicki came back to Poland and did what was really the only option to do if you lived in a 93% Catholic country and you wanted to share Jesus with people. He became a priest and then was thrown into jail by the communists. He spent 28 years in prison. He was beaten and tortured. He figured the only thing they could do to me that they haven't done is to kill me. So he was a fearless, bold proclaimer of Jesus. I used to work with Father Blachnicki in Poland, so I know that story personally. That movement that Blachnicki started, many people say it was the spiritual seedbed of the Solidarity movement in Poland, which toppled communism back in the early 80s and was the first domino to topple communism around the world. Maximilian Kolbe had no idea when he raised his hand to take the place of that young Polish farmer. I mean, it was stupid to even think that that farmer was going to survive. He had no idea that it would make any difference at all. And yet he was faithful to what he felt God was calling him to do. He had no idea that his faithfulness in the cell would be what the Lord used to bring about a conversion of a young Polish man who would be involved in the toppling of communism around the world. He was just faithful. And so I commend to you this weekend to listen hard, have a blast with us, learn all you can, read some books, be challenged. God may be calling you to be a scholar. God may be calling you to be just exactly what you are, but the best thinker you can be right where you are. But I know one thing, he's calling you to be faithful. And he's calling me to be faithful. And we have no idea what he will use our faithfulness to do. When Pope John Paul II, the Polish Pope, first visited Poland as Pope, he came to Auschwitz. And he held a mass on that parade ground outside Maximilian Kolbe's window. And on the platform with the Polish Pope was an elderly Polish farmer who had raised his family because a faithful man named Maximilian Kolbe had taken his place, had died for him, which sounds a lot like Jesus. Have a great weekend here.
You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and then put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. What did Jesus mean by those words in the Sermon on the Mount? What do you mean? I think he meant, I want those of you who are followers of me, I want you to live lives that are like salt, that make people thirst for God. I want you to live lives that are like light, that shine my love and grace and truth and compassion, my message of redemption and hope, to shine that into dark areas of despair. And the question I want to talk about is, what does that look like in the 21st century? What does that look like today? My buddy Mark Middleberg and I wrote a book on this recently called The Unexpected Adventure. And we named it that for a real specific reason, because we really believe that if three things are true of you, if you are motivated to get into spiritual conversations with others, if you're prayerful about that, if you're prepared to do it, then you never know what's going to happen. It could start out an average and routine day. But God might bring an opportunity in your life to have a spiritual conversation that could change someone's eternity. That's the unexpected adventure of the Christian life. Now, granted, there are times when we do engage spiritually in conversations with people we know, people in our world, and it does not go well. You ever had that happen? How many of you have had that happen? Yeah, it's happened to me. I had the most embarrassing thing happen. A few years ago, I was down south speaking at a conference with my buddy Mark, and so we were going to fly home. We had to get something to eat, and we saw one of these Cracker Barrel restaurants. You see these things? So we decided, I'd never been there. He said, well, we got to go. I said, okay. And we noticed they have rocking chairs on the front porch where people sit and they people watch while they're waiting for a table. So in order to get to the front door, we got to walk in front of two people in rocking chairs. First was a young woman, about 18 years old. Dark hair, dark eyes, quite attractive. Young man about the same age sitting next to her. So we got to walk in front of them to get to the front door. That's not a big deal, right? So we're walking along, and just as I step in front of this young woman, I hear her say, "What's a deist?" And I thought, I just wrote a book about that. So I turned on my heels, and I looked her in the eye. I said, "Young lady, a deist is someone who believes that God created the universe," and then he walked away. I said, a deist is someone who believes that God sort of wound up the universe like a giant clock, and he's just letting it tick down. I said, a deist is someone who believes that God is distant and detached from us and disinterested in us. But I said, that's not what the evidence shows. I began to give her the evidence for God's involvement with the cosmos, God's involvement with humankind. Started to give her all this facts, all this data, all this evidence. Started talking about the evidence of cosmology and physics and biochemistry and genetics. I'm laying all this stuff on her, and her eyes are getting bigger and bigger. And I'm on a roll now. You can't stop me. Talk about Jesus entering the human history. Talk about the incarnation, his miracles, his death. I started to give her the evidence. He rose from the dead. Her eyes are getting bigger and bigger. And I'm going on and on and on. Finally, I turned to my friend. I said, can you believe it? I happened to walk in front of her. She said, what's a deist? My friend said, Lee. She said, buenos dias. I really wish that were a joke. That's essentially what happened. She was freaking out, by the way. She was freaking. I mean, it was so embarrassing. But the good news was the ice was already broken. How do you not get into a spiritual conversation at that point? Turned out she was there with her boyfriend for the state track meet, and they took us back to the hotel room where the coach was there and all the athletes, and we got to talk about Jesus for about 45 minutes. So it turned out all right, but man, it was embarrassing. So I'm not sure I was salt and light in the exact right way there. I don't know. But I thought, well, how can we salt and light in the 21st century? Well, what if Jesus physically lived in my house? What would I learn from him about how he would be salt, how he would be light to people in his sphere of relationships? And I thought, so much we could learn about serving others and about prayer, all kinds of things. But I just want to mention one thing this evening, and that's this. I think if Jesus physically lived in my house, he would assure the neighbors that his door would always be open for questions. You got a doubt? You got an objection? Got an issue? Come on in, bring the Starbucks, we'll sit on the floor, we'll talk about this stuff. Don't you think he'd be like that? I mean, I can't think of any example in the New Testament where Jesus slam dunked anybody that came to him like with a sincere question. I was talking about this with Dr. Gary Habermas, one of the great resurrection scholars and an expert on the issue of doubt. And he said, the greatest example of this is John the Baptist. And think about this. If anybody should have known the identity of Jesus being the unique Son of God, it was John the Baptist. He once pointed to Jesus and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." He baptized Jesus. He saw the heavens open up. He heard the voice of the Father saying, "This is my Son in whom I'm well pleased." John the Baptist once pointed to Jesus Christ and he said, "I have seen and I testify, this is the Son of God." But then what happens? He gets arrested, gets thrown in prison. Question: what happens to a lot of us when tough times come? Doubts can begin to creep in, don't they? Questions and that's what happened to John. He's in prison now. He's not quite so sure. Is Jesus the one we've been waiting for, or to wait for somebody else? So he gets a couple friends together. He says, "Hey, go track Jesus down and just ask him to clarify. Are you the one or not?" So his buddies track Jesus down. "Hey, Jesus, John, well, he got busted." And now he's freaking out. And now he's not so sure. So could you just clarify once and for all, are you the one we've been waiting for, or are we to wait for somebody else? Now, here's the question. How does Jesus respond? Does he get angry? Does he get mad? Does he get, how dare John have the temerity to dare ask a question? No. He says, "Go back to John and tell him about what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor." In other words, go back to John and tell him about the evidence you've seen with your own eyes that confirms to you that I am the one I claim to be. And so they go back and do it. But here's the thing. Has this little episode now disqualified John in the mind of Jesus for any role in the kingdom of God? No. It's after this incident that Jesus gets up before a group and he says, among those born of women, there's no one greater than John. John the doubter. John the guy who dared to ask a question. Friends, it is okay for us as Christians to ask questions, as long as we do what John did and we pursue answers. And of course, 1 Peter 3:15 tells us if we're a follower of Jesus, we ought to help our friends find answers too. Always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. Do it gently and respectfully. So many of our friends just have a spiritual sticking point on their journey, their faith journey. And if we can help them find an answer to that sticking point, often they can make great progress in their journey toward Christ. Because the good news is we have a defensible faith. The good news is, as Craig said, there are good answers to the toughest questions of life. I've seen this illustrated 1,000 times. I remember when I was a teaching pastor at a church outside Chicago. And one of my friends from those days, from my atheist days, was the national spokesman for American Atheists Incorporated. That was his job. And so after I became a Christian, I would continue to try to talk to him about spiritual stuff, and we got into little debates and stuff. And finally one day he said to me, Strobel, you Christians are all alike. I said, what do you mean? He said, you'll give the case for Christ, you'll give the evidence for God, but then you won't go out and give the evidence against God and just let people make up their own minds. I said, yeah, I tell you what, you go get the smartest, the most articulate atheist on planet Earth, and I will fly him here to this church, and I will allow him to stand on our platform and proclaim the case for atheism. But I'm going to get a Christian, And that Christian's going to present the case for Christ, and then he's going to debate your atheist, and we'll just let people make up their own minds. He said, you wouldn't do that. I said, oh yeah? We shook hands on it? My very next thought was, man, I should have asked the senior pastor if this was okay. Too late. This ball was rolling. This thing took on a life of its own. Talk radio, talk television in Chicago just kept buzzing about. Chicago attributed 4 advance articles. Why? Because the church said we're not afraid to have an intellectual shootout. We're not afraid to put our faith to the test. I started to get phone calls from radio stations around the country. Can we broadcast this debate live? Sure. Pretty soon we had 117 radio stations coast to coast going to broadcast this thing live. One radio network sent commentators like it was a prize fight or something. You know, there's a jab by the Christian, I think the atheist on the ropes. It was unbelievable. The night of the debate came, traffic was gridlocked within 2 miles of our church. We opened the doors of our auditorium. People ran down the aisles to get a seat. When's the last time you saw someone run into a church? We had 7,778 people live in our auditorium and hooked up by video overflow in various rooms on our campus. We had live coast-to-coast radio about to go on the air, and I was the moderator. I was pacing backstage before it started because I was nervous, and one of our elders came up to me and said, so, Strobel, we are going to win this, aren't we? So the debate comes, and we chose as our representative of Christianity one of the greatest defenders of the faith in the world, a faculty member at Biola University, Dr. William Lane Craig. And he gets up, and he gives the most powerful 25-minute opening statement of the evidence for the existence of God and the truth of Christianity you've ever heard. And I wanted to cheer, but I was a moderator. I had to be neutral. Thank you, Dr. Craig. And now the atheist, Professor Zindler. Good luck, buddy. So this guy, he gets up, and he's about to open his mouth, but we didn't tell him one thing. Not that he would have cared, but we didn't tell him that right where he was standing, underneath the platform was a room. And that room was filled for the entire 2.5 hours of the debate with Christians who were praying that the case for Christ would go out with all its convicting power, and the case for atheism would be recognized for the bankrupt philosophy that it is. And if you've seen the video of that debate, it's on YouTube. You can look it up. You know God answered that prayer. Because we had people vote. What's your spiritual condition as you come in? Who won the debate? What's your spiritual condition as you leave? Initially, we just took the ballots of the people who came in as skeptics, as agnostics, as atheists, and non-believers. Just among that group, having heard the case for Christ and the case for atheism, over 8 out of 10 said the case for Christ was by far the most compelling, and 47 people walked in as confirmed atheists, heard both sides, and walked out as followers of Jesus Christ. And you know what else? Not one person became an atheist. I'm just saying. And if you think that was a fluke, we have here copies of the debate that William Lane Craig, the Christian, did with Christopher Hitchens a few years ago at Biola. Christopher Hitchens, one of the top 4 atheists on the planet. And let me quote to you the atheist commentator's conclusion after watching that debate. This is the atheist evaluation of the debate. Quote, Bill Craig, the Christian, spanked Christopher Hitchens like a foolish child. That's the atheist talking. Friends, we have an unfair advantage in the marketplace of ideas. We have truth on our side. So what's my takeaway? Am I saying, therefore, we all ought to go out debating people? That's not, I don't think that's the takeaway. Some people are gifted at that, and God bless them. I think it plays an important role in the kingdom. I'm not gifted at that. Are you a debater? Are you skilled? I'm not. It's not what I do. Friends, I think for most of us, the key word is not debate. It's dialogue. It's relationships. It's friendships. It's conversations. It's what I call relational apologetics. It's inviting people in our sphere of influence into a relationship where we can listen to them and we can validate them as human beings and validate their journey. And we can discuss openly and honestly matters of faith, and we can walk them toward a relationship with Jesus Christ. And my belief is that as a result of this weekend, as we learn to be salt and light together, we're going to emerge as stronger salt and as brighter light. That we're going to have more love for people who are confused about God, and more conviction about why we believe what we believe, so that we can enter into relationships, as 1 Peter 3:15 says, gently and respectfully, and engage with our friends to help them see the truth of who Jesus Christ is. So I'm excited for all of us this weekend, what we're going to learn and take away. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about my journey from atheism to faith, and I'm going to talk about the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ that convinced me that he is the Son of God. And I hope we all go away saying, you know what? I can be stronger salt. I can be brighter light, and God can use me in a series of unexpected adventures that are going to be the joy of my life. God bless you. Thank you.